Hi everyone, welcome back to another Diablo Immortal video. So this is the first video of 2025, so Happy New Year to everybody. I hope this will be a good year for you all and also a good year for Diablo Immortal as well. So for the last couple of days I've been trying to build and tweak a Necromancer build for Escort Vanguard, which works well for me, and I wanted to share this with everyone else, and I'm calling this build Omnislash. So this build relies on the following skill combinations: Corpse Lance, Grim Scythe, Skeletal Mages, Bone Armor and Bone Spear. So let's go into detail. So as you're all aware, the current season of Vanguard is very different to the previous season of Vanguard. So most likely a build which was working well for you in the previous Vanguard may not work well with this Vanguard, because you're always on the move with the cart. You need to take out as many enemies as you can around that cart, not let the cart get damaged, and you also need to deal with any damage along the way as well, and also the boss at the end. I had a Vanguard build from the previous Vanguard, and I just wanted to tweak what I had and completely start again actually, and get something which works really well for me for this new season. And I've been practicing it a lot today and it seems to be working quite nicely, and I'm quite happy with it, so I'm going to share it in more detail. Okay, so we're going to cover things like the skills, the Paragon, the essences, the set items, everything like that. I'm going to do the essences a bit later, but first I'm going to start with the easy one, so set items. So for set items, this is your chance to go in with full set of Vitu's urges and make the most out of it. So I've got 6 pieces of Vitu's equipped here in these first 6 slots of the set items. Now, as you can see, the first bonus is increases the duration of all beneficial effects on you or your party members by 30%, which is great. The second bonus is increases the target's attack speed by 30% for 3 seconds each time you use a skill to grant a beneficial effect to yourself or a party member. So that's obviously really good to increase that speed. And then the last one, this is the most important one. So each time you use a skill to buff yourself or a party member, you create an area of apotheosis for 12 seconds that grants 12% life drain to yourself and any party members within this area. Cannot occur more often than once every 40 seconds. Now this is really important because it means this is going to be your primary healing for yourself and your party members, which means you can skip taking in a heal charm and go in with a damage heavy one, for example Bane. So I'm going to show that a bit later on, but this is really important because that life drain is for 12 seconds. That's pretty decent. And like I said, this is going to be your main focus for healing. Now the other 2 slots, because I'm going in with skeletal mages, I'm increasing the mage's damage by 15% here. And yeah, if you don't want that extra 15% damage for your mages, you could swap this out for anything else. But because I'm using mages for this build, I'm going in with these 2 shepherds set just to increase the damage by 15%. So that's the set items. Fairly simple, easy to obtain. You don't have to mix and match too many different set items to get this working. It's just 6 pieces of one, 2 pieces of another, just to keep things simple. So next up is the essences, which is the most important thing for this build. So I'm going to spend some time going over that now, and then we'll go over things like Paragon and anything else later on to finish off. So let's head over to the Essence Transfer NPC. Okay, we're at the Essence Transfer NPC. So once again, the skills that I have equipped here are Corpse Lance, Grim Scythe, Skeletal Mages, Bone Armor and Bone Spear.
Legendary weapons.
Okay, so for this Omnislash build I have for the Escort Vanguard mission, let's go ahead and check out each of these essences. I've had a play around with these and I think this combination works really nicely. It's really fun to use, so let me know what you think. Let's start with the Helm. So for the Helm, I've gone with Indestructible Watcher. So this is where Corpse Lance triggers an explosion after hitting enemies 4 times in a short period, dealing 25,105 damage to nearby enemies. Damage from additional explosions to the same enemy is reduced by 50%, damage is increased by 90%, and Corpse Lance damage is increased by a further 10%. So the reason I've picked this one is because we're doing a Corpse Lance attack which is going to be doing some fast damage to enemies all around you, and if any of those enemies get hit 4 times in that short period, you're going to get that 25k damage to all nearby enemies. So I would say the focus in the Escort Vanguard mission is to take out as many enemies as you can as close to that cart quickly. So there's going to be lots of enemies coming towards the cart. They're all going to be grouped up. You don't want them to take out the cart, and you want to get as many of them down as you can as quick as possible. So this does damage to nearby enemies, so I thought this is quite useful to have when you trigger that explosion. So not only you're just hitting that one enemy, you're also taking some damage off the other enemies around that one as well. So I thought this is quite a nice one to go in with. Now, if you were to swap this one out with anything, an alternative one would be Gatefisk Helm. So let's go down to that one. It's over here. This one here. So you could either pick from either of those two, just giving everyone an option here. So you can either go with the explosion and dealing damage to nearby enemies that I've gone with, or you can have your Grim Scythe also slicing through enemies' armor, increasing their damage by 11.4% for 6 seconds, up to a maximum of 34.2%, and you get an additional 10% increase. So both of these are really good. The Gatefisk Helm will be really good with the boss at the end as well, but I've gone with Indestructible Watcher just to try and take out as many enemies as I can. So they're the two options for the helm. Okay, for the chest piece, now because we have bone armor equipped, I'm going in with Draw Deep, which is Feast of the Dead. Bone armor now passively absorbs the souls of enemies you slay, generating a shield that absorbs damage and grows in strength with each kill. Additionally, bone armor can be activated instantly. The cooldown's reduced by 7.2%, and then you get an additional 10% cooldown as well. So this works nicely with a legendary skill, which I'm going to show later on. And I thought it's nice to have just a bit of survivability on top of your Vitu's Urges area of effect as well. So because I'm not going in with my heal, I've got Vitu's Urges, and then I've got a little bit of help with bone armor as well for your healing. Now, the reason I've gone with this one over Parting Gift, which is this one over here. So this is Parting Gift, where bone armor now grants you and all nearby party members 5 charges of damage absorption, each able to absorb 53,917 damage. So the reason I've gone in with Draw Deep over Parting Gift is mostly due to the cooldown. Now, if I was to select Parting Gift, it's 14 seconds when I use it until I can use it again. So it's 14 seconds until you can use Parting Gift again. If I use Draw Deep, it's only 7 seconds until I can use it again. So I can keep using that buff more often. And I've got another essence that works with bone armor, which I'll show you. And it just means I can trigger that other essence quicker as well. So it's up to you if you want to use these two. Obviously, for Draw Deep, you're only giving yourself that shield, that absorption shield. And for Parting Gift, you're giving it to yourself, your summons, and your other party members. So if you did want to give your other party members a bit of absorption, damage absorption, if they are getting hit quite a lot, maybe Parting Gift might be a way to go. So it's up to you if you want to pick from either of these two, but I've gone in with Draw Deep. Now, another alternative here, if you didn't want the extra healing and shield, and if you're confident enough and you wanted a bit more damage instead, I would suggest going in with Frigid Repose, which is the one down here, this one here. So this is where bone armor now grants you and your summoned a vortex of ice and bone that moves with you, and damaging and chilling nearby enemies. So this is Whispers of Frost. So this is a nice one. It will, reduce the attack of the enemies, slow them down, and deal damage as well. And using Whispers of Frost will also activate another essence, which I'm using with bone armor, that increases your critical hit damage. So both Feast of the Dead and Whispers of Frost will activate the other bone armor essence we've got. So you can pick Whispers of Frost if you wanted a little bit more damage. The other thing to keep in mind is the legendary skill which I'm using for this build. You'll have to change it if you go with Whispers of Frost. So I'm just throwing that alternative out there if you do want to go with a little bit more damage. I've also noticed that Whispers of Frost doesn't last very long either. It doesn't hang around for that long, so that's one other thing. And you've got 11 seconds cooldown for Whispers of Frost until you can use it again. So you've got to take that in consideration as well. Okay, moving on to the shoulders. So Incision Cusp, while bone armor is active, it also increases your critical hit damage by 30.4%, which is massive, and the bone armor cooldown is decreased by 10%. So as I said, this works really well with your chest essence. So if you were using Frigid Repose, then Incision Cusp is going to work with that. If you're using Feast of the Dead or Parting Gift, then Incision Cusp is also going to work along with those two, because I've tested as well just to make sure the critical hit damage definitely goes up with Parting Gift, Draw Deep and Frigid Repose. So all three of those will work with this essence. Now I've gone in with this because we all have some nice critical hit chance, especially in Vanguard as well. Hopefully you're boosting your critical hit chance, and your critical hit damage needs to be decent enough to actually make the most out of your critical hit chance. So if you're sort of lacking in that critical hit damage, this is perfect to boost that up. Now I found that your critical hit chance is, well, mine is usually around like 80 to 100 when I'm doing Vanguard, so that's why I've not got any essences which boost critical hit chance further, and I feel like it's the critical hit damage which I really needed to boost up to make the most out of it. Now let me show you this now. So for example, if I have a look at my critical hit damage at the moment, it's 33.5%. My critical hit chance is 17%, but that goes up massively when I'm in Vanguard. It's around 80 to 100%. It's my other skills and your charm and Mother's Lament and loads of things kick in, so that's why I haven't got anything else to increase that. So the damage is 33.5%. Now if I use bone armor and go back into that menu, you can see my critical hit damage goes up by 63.9%, which is a massive jump. And then maybe other factors that boost that up even more as well when you're actually in the Vanguard environment. Maybe other party members might boost it up even more, but 63.9% is a massive jump to what it was before. So at least I'm using the most out of the critical hit damage when that chance actually triggers. An alternative for the shoulder, if you didn't want that critical hit damage, would be maybe to bolster your mages a little bit more. So maybe you could go with Synoid's Anointing to increase the skeletal mage charge by 1, so you can have one more mage doing 100% damage, and maybe any of the other mage related essences. But I would suggest going in with boosting your critical hit damage. I think this is a really good one to go in with, so that's what I suggest. Okay, now for the legs. So for the leg essence, I've gone in with Rosin's Keening. So this is where Corpse Lance damage is increased by 19%, and you get an additional 10% damage increase as well. So this essence is mainly to increase that damage from Corpse Lance as much as you can. So this was kind of a no-brainer for me. I tried a few other ones and I just wanted to have that extra damage for Corpse Lance because it's going to be active most of the time during this Vanguard, and it's a nice one to use. Now if you wanted any of the extra healing, for example, you could go in with the newer leg essence they've introduced in the game, which is Bone Armor now instantly heals you for 25% of the absorb value of the shield. So if you didn't want as much of that damage, but you wanted a bit more survivability because you're not going in with a heal charm, then you've already got Bone Armor. You could use Thundero Plates to give yourself a little bit of a heal if you do end up taking some damage, instead of having that extra damage yourself. But you shouldn't really be taking that much damage if you have the full Vituge set, and if your other party members are doing their job as well and you're running away from those red circles. You shouldn't really be dying that much, or you know, somebody should have a heal charm as well. So that's why I haven't gone with this. But if you did feel you're more comfortable having a bit of survivability, then go in with Thundero Plates. So for an alternative, you could go in with an essence that bolsters your Grimscythe damage even more. So for example, something like Grimscythe increasing your primary attack speed by 5%, or what else do we have? I think you've got Bone Armor cooldown as well. You could go in with that, or Grimscythe applying bleed. But one essence to stay away from is this one, Gilded Nightmare. Do not pick Gilded Nightmare, because this is going to cause your enemies to flee in fear for 1.5 seconds. You don't want your enemies to run away further from that cart, because the more you get enemies running away, the longer it takes for you to kill them, because you're going to have to go out of that cart area to kill them and bring them back in again. You might have a barbarian that's trying to grab all of the enemies together, and they might get annoyed when you're suddenly fearing the enemies and cause them to run away. So definitely do not take in Gilded Nightmare into Vanguard. So I would suggest going in with Corpse Lance damage increase, but either pick from this or something that increases your Grim Scythe. But the one thing to be careful of is whichever Grim Scythe one that you do pick, make sure you go into your skills tab to make sure it's not cancelled out, so it is actually taking effect. But yeah, for my build, I've gone in with Roshin's Keening to increase that Corpse Lance damage. Okay, for the main hand weapon, so this is the key essence for this build, so I wouldn't suggest changing this. This is Reaper's Calling, also Defiling Swarm. So Grim Scythe now conjures whirling scythes that orbit you, damaging enemies and generating corpses. Grim Scythe damage increased by 18% and an additional 10% damage as well. So this is a great one. I'm sure most of you Necromancers have used this at some point. You just get those spinning scythes around you, and this is ideal when you're standing in the middle of that circle where the cart is, and you're trying to keep enemies away and killing as many enemies that get close to the cart. This just deals damage all around you. So I definitely recommend keeping that one. Okay, for the offhand weapon, so I've gone in with Bone Spear also destroys enemy armor for 3.2 seconds, increasing the critical hit damage they take by 20%. Bone Spear damage is increased by an additional 10%. So this is further increasing the critical hit damage that the enemies are going to take. So you've already got the extra 30.4 critical hit damage on yourself, increasing by what you already have. And then you're increasing the critical hit damage the enemies take by 20%. So this is a great essence to go in with. Now the only alternative that I could think of worth going in with here is Ramshackle Scythe, which is, if I go down here, this one here. So Bone Spear launches a larger penetrating spear, dealing 34,507 damage that is no longer reduced when hitting multiple enemies, and you get an additional damage increase as well. So either of these two would be ones to pick from, because we're going in with Bone Spear. I prefer increasing the critical hit damage the enemies take by 20%. Okay, so for the main hand shield, so we're going in with Vortex of Bone. So this is another key essence that works along with Defiling Swarm. So these two are key essences for this build. So this is Departed Appetite, Vortex of Bones. Corpse Lance now consumes nearby corpses to create a vortex of bones surrounding you that damages enemies. Corpse Lance damage is increased by 18% and you get an additional 10% damage. So obviously this works nicely with the Corpse Lance damage increasing by 19% and an additional 10%, and then works also nicely with the explosion as well and increased damage from Corpse Lance there. So the reason I've gone in with this is basically there's going to be loads of corpses lying around in Vanguard, and also this Reaper's Calling is going to generate you corpses, additional corpses, which is going to pair nicely with Vortex of Bones. So using those corpses, you're just going to get that Vortex of Bones spinning around you along with Grim Scythe, and if you did have Frigid's Riposte as well, you're going to have that spinning as well. So yeah, this is a great one for this Vanguard, because once again, you're going to be standing in that cart area, in that circle, and you're just going to keep those enemies at bay and then just take them all down that are coming closer to the carts, just to kill them as quickly as you can. And I wouldn't really recommend swapping this out with anything else for this build, because it's key for this build. So hopefully you have fun with using this essence. So now for the offhand shield. So being a Necromancer, I did have to take in some sort of summons. If it was Skeletal Champions, if it was Golem or Mages, I'm going to have to go in with some sort of summons. And I picked Mages to go in with. And I really like the Spectral Mages. So this is Scattered Light, mainly because they are untargetable. I've noticed so many times where I've been summoning mages and some of the harder content, the harder PvE content in the game, I would summon them and they would die fairly quickly if they get hit by enemies, and they wouldn't really be hanging around for their full length of time. I like Spectral Mages just because they hang around for the full amount of time and they will deal as much damage as they can for that full amount. So I've gone in with Scattered Light, and this is where Skeletal Mage now summons untargetable Spectral Mages that cast Hungering Soulfire, so that's your ultimate. The other thing is that these spectral mages will also be summoned passively, so if you don't end up clicking it, you are always going to get one spawning continuously, and the damage is increased by 18%, and you get an additional 10% damage. And this obviously works nicely with the 2 pieces of shepherds that we've got to increase their damage by an additional 15%. And yeah, there wasn't really any other mage essence I could think of swapping this out. Some of them, only one mage gets spawned, and some of them have like a really long cooldown as well. The cooldown for this one isn't bad at all. So if you click it, it's 9 seconds until you can use it again. You get 2 of those mages spawn. They're not going to be targeted, so they're not going to die. And for example, when they go away, your cooldown's already up. You can spawn another 2. So you're always going to have 2 of those mages up, continuously hitting enemies around you whilst you're doing that vortex with your corpse lance, whilst Grimscythe is spinning around, whilst you're doing your bone spear. And also when you get to the boss, if there's not enough corpses around, then these mages are going to come in really handy to do additional damage and attacks when you're fighting that boss if you are lacking corpses. That is pretty much it for the essences for this build. That is my Omnislash build for Escort Vanguard mission for a Necromancer. The other thing worth mentioning is I did try going in with a corpse explosion build in Vanguard for Necromancer, but I found that there just wasn't enough corpses to fully utilize the corpse lance build. So what I did is, for the shoulders, I equipped Surge and Stillness, which is this one here, where corpse explosion now causes corpses to pull themselves towards the nearest enemy before exploding. So I thought this might be really good to use in Vanguard. So I paired this up with Clot Burst, which is the one down here. Corpse explosion damage increased by 19%. So I did try that, and I just found that, yeah, there wasn't enough corpses. Grimscythe was generating corpses, and there were other corpses around. Corpse Lance was taking up most of the corpses, and there just wasn't enough corpses for corpse explosion. So I did try a corpse explosion build. I just found it wasn't as effective. The other thing is that this could conflict with a barbarian or maybe a wizard who's grouping enemies together and focusing on grouping enemies together. So if they're grouping enemies together, you might conflict with that and it might not work nicely. So it's probably best to let another class do the grouping together, for example barbarian, and let them do that, and then maybe you help in the other areas instead. So that's one thing I thought would be worth mentioning. Okay, I'm at the training dummy now. So for example, I've got the mages up, I've got Grimscythe up, I've got Corpse Lance up, and I've got Bone Armor as well. And I'm basically just doing this. You can see the amount of damage that's surrounding us. You got the Corpse Lance, you got the Vortex, you got the mages firing from around, and they're not going to be targeted. There's 3 mages up, and I've got Bone Armor as well, dealing some survivability buffs. And then you've got the Vitus Urges doing their 12 seconds of aura as well. So that's basically how this build is going to work together. Okay, let's take a look at a few of the other areas. So for Warband Buffs, I have gone in with an obvious choice that works well for me. I've gone in with increasing block chance by 15%. It's one that I use quite a lot. I've got Protector on just because I have an increase of 6.5% for your life and size by 15%. So I go in with that for the Warband buff. And for Paragon, I've gone in with Slinger. So it's up to you if you want to use for Survivor for just obviously survivability, and pick some Paragons that work well for you for that additional survivability. But I've gone in with Slinger just to deal a bit more damage. So the skills which I've activated are obviously the ones on the right here. So I've gone in with Uncanny just to increase the critical hit chance even further when I have 10 or more stacks of Unseen Dynamism. And then Spell Surge as well. So I get that Chain Lightning that arcs through nearby enemies and deals 34% base damage, just because we're going to have lots of enemies in this Vanguard Escort mission. So that's just to deal a bit more damage there. I've gone in with Unseen Dynamism, so I get those stacks when I hit enemies with either a primary attack or skills, and you've got to switch between them. So I've gone with Gifted just to increase the stacks up to 15 times. And then the last one I went in with Sharp Eye just to increase that critical hit chance even further. Now for the legendary skill, it's an interesting one because I was flipping between Benefactor and Shock Barrier. I did use Shock Barrier a few times and it was quite effective, so it depends if you want to use Shock Barrier or go in with Benefactor. So I thought it would just be nice to have some additional survivability to help yourself and your team members in Vanguard as well, so at least you can help them out even more along with the Vitu's Urges. So when I use Bone Armor, which is the buff skill, it will grant a shield to nearby allies, absorbing damage equal to 15% of your maximum life for 6 seconds. And this can't occur for more often than every 30 seconds. So you could either use this one for additional survivability to help your team out, or you can go with Shock Barrier, which I did use sometimes as well. And it was quite good because the cooldown for this is only 10 seconds. So when I do get that absorbing shield, it causes you to unleash a burst of energy, dealing damage to all nearby enemies equal to 30% of the shield's absorb value, up to a maximum of 40%. So you'll notice on the ground, if I just do this buff now, there was hard to see, but there was like a yellow buff that just went off into a circle, and it did like a shock absorption. So that's what basically happens with that legendary skill. You get that unleashed burst of energy. So it's up to you if you want to go in with Shock Barrier or Benefactor. I thought it would be nice to have a legendary skill which actually helps out with some survivability. So that's why I've gone with Benefactor. But if you did want to use your Bone Armor actually doing a bit of damage, then you could switch to Shock Barrier. So either of these two are nice ones to use. So that's what I've gone in with for the Paragon. Now, for the legendary gems, now I don't really like to focus too much on legendary gems because everyone's going to have different legendary gems depending on their playstyle, their preferences, which gems they've got lucky with, which ones they're able to get, etc. But go in with anything which does as much damage as you can. So for me, I've got Roiling Consequence, Blood-Soaked Jade, Phoenix Ashes, Gloom Cask, Echoing Shade, Starfire Shard, Mother's Lament, which I found works quite well because I noticed the critical hit chance boost up massively when using this one. And then I'm also using Morn Skull as well. So they are my legendary gems. Now, because we're using Corpse Lance, you can get bonuses from Eternal Gear as well, from Eternal Legendary Gear. I haven't got that at the moment, but there is some bonuses which you can use that improves Corpse Lance even further. So maybe keep an eye out for Eternal Legendary Gear, and if you get any Corpse Lance related bonuses, which will definitely help you even more with this build. And let's finish off by going over the skills. So just to double check, there's nothing that's being cancelled out here. So for Bone Spear, I'm getting that bonus that destroys enemy armor for 3.2 seconds, increasing the critical hit damage they take by 20%. For Bone Armor, I've got Feast of the Dead here, that passively absorbs the souls of enemies you slay, generating that shield. And also, activating Bone Armor instantly grants you a 10 stack shield that absorbs damage. And if we scroll down further, we do get that increase of critical hit damage by 30.4%, and some cooldown reduction as well. If we have a look at Corpse Lance, we are getting Vortex of Bones there. And we're also getting Corpse Lance damage increased by 19%. And at the bottom, you can see that we're also getting that Explosion after hitting enemies 4 times in a short period, dealing 25,000 damage to all nearby enemies. And you get an additional explosions to the same enemies reduced by 50%, but then you get a 90% increased damage and 10% damage as well. For Grim Scythe, I've got Reaper's Calling, so you've got that spinning scythe, and my charm has actually got an additional 2% damage there as well. And for mages, you can see that we've got our untargetable spectral mages that for 10 seconds they cast Hungering Soulfire, dealing 9,063 damage to enemies. So they are the skills that we've got, so just to make sure nothing's being cancelled out there. So remember, when you're using Bone Armor, you're going to have to keep an eye out for the Vitu's Urges aura around you. So if I click it now, the larger green circle is that 12-second aura from the 6-piece Vitu. The smaller green circle is your Bone Armor essence that we've got, the damage absorption shield. Now, just some final tips I'd mention are obviously stay near the cart at all times. So you want to stay as close to that cart don't run away to kill the enemies because you're just going to slow things down. You want a class like Barbarian or maybe Wizard to bring in enemies towards the cart to suck them in and take them out. But any enemies that are around the cart, you're going to be using this build to sort of deal as much area damage as you can in the area of that cart to take as many out as you can. So that's why this build is really effective in this instance. Run away from the red circles when you see incoming monsters text appear on the screen. So as soon as it says incoming monsters, run away. You will see red circles appearing on the ground. That will do massive damage. You do not want to be hit by those. So make sure you run away from those circles and then make sure you get back to the cart. And also, if you see another Necromancer doing the 6-piece Vitu Urge aura, so the large green circle, don't use yours at the same time. So don't click on bone armor as well. So maybe stagger it. So let them do their one, wait a few seconds, and then use your one. Then hopefully they will use their one afterwards. So try and stagger the Vitu's Urge aura if you can. If you see another Necromancer that's also using that as well. So they're the main tips that I can think of. Good luck with Vanguard with this build. I'm calling this my Omnislash build. I'm finding it really fun. It works well for me. So let's go into Vanguard and let's just see this build in action. Oh, and I almost forgot about the charm. So I'm going in with Bane because we're not going in with a healing charm here. We're going to be sticking to Vitu's Urges 6-piece for our healing and also bone armor as well for the survivability. So we're going to try get as much damage down as we can. You want to go in with Bane. Blight Orb is the one to go for. My charm is rank 17 at the moment. So we get Blight Orb for 8 seconds that tracks and follows the enemies, increasing the damage they take by 100% while near the orb. Life and damage increased by 1860%, and then you get these secondary attributes as well. So Bane is the charm that I go in with for Vanguard now. I used to go in with Heal, but I swapped over to Bane now, and using other things to keep me and my party members alive. So that's worth mentioning. Okay, I've got in a Vanguard party. So to begin with, we just have a double check. My critical hit chance is 17 and damage is 33.5%. Now we've got Monkey Boy in our party. He's going to be grabbing enemies. So I'm going to activate all of the skills. Let's take a look at the critical hit damage. It's 80.4%. Sorry, critical hit chance is 80.4%. The damage is 63.9%.
Give it more time.
So you can see how much it jumps. So my bone armor is doing that Vitu's Urges. Now these are the red circles that you need to avoid. Go back to the cart. Grim Scythe is spinning around. Corpse Lance is spinning around as well. Got the mages that are not dying, and I've got myself doing Bone Spear. Let's take a look again. 80.4% critical hit chance, 63.9% damage. Now I have seen at times when I've been doing Vanguard that the critical hit chance goes to 100% from 80, and that's why I haven't equipped anything to increase my critical hit chance further, because sometimes it's 80, sometimes it's 100. So I've just stuck to increasing that critical hit damage instead. So our Barbarian's actually using the chain skill to group enemies and sort of bring them in and take them out quickly. I'm using my spinning blades and bones just to take out anyone near the cart. Stay close to the cart. Using bone armor for survivability and healing with Vitu's Urges. Incoming monsters again. Dodge those circles. Go back in. Okay, just have another check. So 50.4% critical hit chance, 63.9 for the damage.
No, not yet.
And let's just check one more time. 22.4 and then 63.9. So you can see it's gone down a bit and then it will jump back up.
That ability must recharge.
There we go, 80.4% critical hit chance. So you can see what I mean about the critical hit chance. You know, majority of the time it will be at 80, or sometimes it will go up to 100. At the boss, I've got my mages doing lots of damage. not being killed. Got my ultimate up as well.
Death is patient.
And we've got plenty of time on the clock as well.
Still recharging.
And there we go. That's pretty much how I use this build, and it's super fun to use, as you can see, and it's really effective and useful for the whole party as well.
Death is patient.
And that's it for my Necromancer Vanguard Escort mission build video. Hope you found that useful, and hopefully you can use this build and it works for you. Let me know in the comment section what you think, if there's anything I can tweak to make this even better, or if there's something that you thought about which I may have forgotten to take into consideration that I might try out myself. Like I said, this works quite nicely for me, and I've used this with some other party members and it seems to work nicely for them as well. And it's just a really fun one to use, and I'll stick with this for this season until it ends, and we'll see what the next Vanguard season is like and if we have to switch things up. So yeah, try this out yourself, let me know what you think. Hopefully you found this useful, and thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.